When I took the janitor job at Brookville High, I didn't tell anyone my last name. I didn't mention the 40 years I'd spent in an office corner with my name etched on the door or the degrees hanging on the walls that no one ever looked at. I just introduced myself as Mr. Ben and took the mop from the head custodian like it was an old friend. The other janitors nodded politely. The teachers smiled, some barely. And the students, well, to them, I was invisible, part of the walls that got cleaned while they dreamed of their futures. I didn't mind. After losing my wife, I needed something that kept me moving. My house had become too quiet, every corner echoing with her laughter that wasn't there anymore. I'd retired years ago, but sitting still made the days longer and the nights unbearable. So when the job came up, sweeping halls and wiping desks for a few dollars an hour, I took it. I figured maybe if I kept walking, I'd stop feeling so stuck in time. The first week, most people didn't notice me. I liked it that way. I'd sweep through the halls while the last bell rang and watch the students rush out, arms full of books and dreams. But there were a few who noticed, some not kindly. A group of seniors liked to joke when I passed. They'd whisper loud enough for me to hear, "Guess retirement didn't work out, huh, old man?" Or, "Maybe he's here to spy on us for extra credit." I'd just smile. It wasn't worth responding. Life had taught me that people mock what they don't understand. One day during lunch duty, I heard them again. One of the boys, Jason, dropped his soda on purpose, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Hey, janitor, clean up on aisles, stupid." His friends burst into laughter. I bent down slowly, wiped the spill, and said, "No problem, son. Everyone makes a mess now and then." He blinked, confused by the calm. They expected anger, maybe humiliation. But I'd learned long ago, dignity is the quietest form of strength. After that day, I became a small curiosity to them. They couldn't figure out why I didn't react, why I seemed content. Every morning, I greeted the teachers, polished the trophies in the display case, and made sure the flag out front never hung crooked. It gave me peace. Sometimes, when I was alone in the gym, I'd sweep the floor and look up at the banners, state championships, years of hard work by kids who once dreamed as big as I once had. What no one knew was that my old office wasn't far from there. I'd been the regional director for an engineering firm that built the very sports complex they played in. My signature was on the final blueprint framed in the district office, though the new principal had no idea. I'd led teams, signed million-dollar contracts, and spent my life buried in work until I looked up one day and realized I'd missed the small things. Sunsets with my wife, dinners with friends, my daughter's recitals. When she passed away from a heart condition, it broke something in me, and I promised myself I'd spend the rest of my time doing something that mattered. Cleaning may not sound meaningful to most people, but to me, it was pure, honest. The floors didn't lie. The work was humble, simple, and quiet, and I found a strange peace in that. Still, not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, while I was fixing a broken locker hinge, a teacher named Mrs. Clark stopped by. She was kind, the type who spoke gently even when she didn't have to. "Mr. Ben," she said, "you always seem so calm. The kids can be cruel sometimes. Doesn't it bother you?" I smiled. "When you get to my age, Mrs. Clark, you learn that people only see what their eyes allow them to. The trick is not to let their sight become your reflection." She paused, then nodded slowly. "That's beautiful," she said. "You sound like someone who's lived a lot of life." "Too much," I replied softly. "But that's what makes the cleaning easier. I've learned what's worth keeping and what needs to be thrown away." A week later, something unexpected happened. The school announced a career day. They wanted professionals from different industries to come and speak to the students. I was sweeping the hallway when I overheard the principal listing names: doctors, police officers, entrepreneurs. I chuckled quietly to myself. Once upon a time, I'd have been on that list. That night, while emptying the trash cans, I found a crumpled flyer about the event. A strange impulse hit me. Not pride, not regret, just a thought. What if the kids knew that the man they mocked once designed the very building they studied in? But I shrugged it off. I wasn't there for validation. I was there to stay alive, to find peace in motion. Still, the universe has a way of making quiet truths loud. The day before the event, Jason and his friends were horsing around near the science lab. They kicked a soccer ball that shattered a glass beaker. scattering chemicals across the floor. I rushed over before anyone got hurt, guiding them back. Jason laughed nervously. "Relax, janitor. It's just glass." "Glass can cut deep, son," I said quietly as I started cleaning. "And the funny thing about cuts, they don't always bleed right away." He didn't reply, but something about the way I said it made him pause. Maybe it was the tone, or maybe it was the way I looked at him. Not angry, not scolding, just seeing him, really seeing him. That night, as I locked up, I found myself standing alone in the hallway again. The lights dimmed, the echo of distant laughter fading. I thought about my wife, about my old office, about the blueprints that bore my name. I touched the mop handle like a staff holding me steady and whispered, "You did good today, Ben. You stayed kind." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt human again. The next morning, I arrived before dawn, as usual. The corridors were still, bathed in that pale fluorescent glow that made everything look colder than it really was. I liked those quiet hours before anyone else came in, before the clatter of shoes, the ringing phones, and the small talk that never really meant much. The broom in my hand had become something like a companion. Every stroke across the floor helped me clear away not just the dust, but the thoughts that sometimes threatened to drown me. "Morning, Mr. Daniel," said Rosa, one of the younger cleaning staff, as she clocked in with a tired smile. "You never miss a day, huh?" I smiled back faintly. "Old habits die hard." She laughed, thinking I meant the habit of working. But she didn't know, not yet, that it was discipline that had been carved into me long before this building, long before this mop and these walls. It wasn't habit. It was survival. As the day began, the office filled with its usual rhythm, footsteps echoing, keyboards clicking, laughter drifting from the break room. Most of the employees barely looked at me, except when they wanted an extra trash bag or when I happened to be in their way. They saw an old man in a faded uniform, someone invisible, someone who had settled. Around 10, a group of interns passed me near the elevator. They were loud, full of themselves, talking about their weekend plans. "Man, imagine ending up like him," one of them said, nodding toward me. They didn't whisper. "Still mopping floors at that age. Must have messed up somewhere." The others laughed, and one even added, "Probably didn't plan his life right." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse, on battlefields, in boardrooms, and in the quiet moments when life tested what I was made of. Their words brushed against me like the wind against steel, noticeable, but never piercing. Still, something deep inside stirred, not anger, but an ache. Not for myself, but for them, for their blindness. They didn't see that sometimes the ones holding the broom once held the world together. That evening, as I packed up, I passed by the same group in the parking lot. Their fancy cars were parked side by side, engines humming. One of them dropped his coffee cup and didn't even bother to pick it up. I bent down, grabbed it, and tossed it in the bin. He smirked at me, rolled his window up, and sped off. Rosa, who had stayed late with me, shook her head. "Kids today," she muttered. "They don't know half of what people have been through." I just smiled faintly. "They'll learn," I said softly. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, my reflection followed me in every dark window. A bent figure with a slow step. But I knew better than to judge a man by what the world saw. Once, I had walked into rooms where everyone stood up when I entered. Once, I made decisions that shaped lives, that changed outcomes. But that was before everything burned, before I chose silence over recognition. Inside my small apartment, I sat in my chair by the window. The city light stretched far into the distance, cold and beautiful. On the wall, behind a worn curtain, hung something I hadn't looked at in years, a framed photo, edges yellowing with time. In it, I stood tall in a crisp uniform, medals pinned to my chest, shaking hands with a man whose name was in every newspaper that year. I stared at it for a long time, not out of pride, but out of remembrance. That man, the one in the photo, had died years ago, at least to the world. The man who remained was just Daniel, the janitor. And maybe that was what I wanted, a life free from the noise, from the masks. But fate has a strange way of pulling you back, even when you've long walked away. The next week, something happened. The company where I worked was hosting a high-profile event, Investors, city officials, even a few military representatives were attending. Everyone was running around, polishing, organizing, making everything shine. For me, it was just another day of sweeping. Until I heard a voice. Deep, commanding, familiar in a way that made my heart skip a beat. "Make sure the conference hall is secure before the guests arrive," the man said. I turned, and for a second, I was no longer standing in a corporate building. I was back in the desert, under a burning sun, hearing that same voice call out across a field of dust and danger. It was Colonel Briggs, my former commanding officer. He was older now, gray around the edges, but the same sharp eyes, the same presence. I froze, broom in hand. For a moment, I thought he might recognize me. But why would he? To him, Daniel Pierce was a name from the past. A soldier who disappeared after the last mission. He walked right past me. Didn't even look my way. I kept sweeping, heart pounding, memories flooding back like a storm. The faces of my unit, the explosion, the chaos, the decision I made that cost me everything. When the event began, I stood in the corner of the room, invisible again, watching men in suits shake hands, toast glasses, and talk about progress. And there, standing next to the colonel, was the company's CEO, a man half his age but already full of arrogance, the same man who once laughed at me for being a janitor. Life, I thought, really does come full circle. And as I watched, something in me shifted. A quiet, deliberate decision forming like steel hardening in fire. Maybe it was time they learned who I truly was. The day after the event, the office buzzed with leftover excitement. Everyone was still talking about the big investors' dinner, about how successful it was, about the important military guest who praised the company's partnerships. I walked through the corridors with my mop bucket, listening to bits and pieces of their chatter, every word a reminder of the ghosts I had spent years trying to bury. When I reached the break room, the young intern from before, the one who had mocked me, was bragging loudly about how he networked with Colonel Briggs. He said I had leadership potential, he said, leaning back with a grin. "You know, some people are just meant for success." I said nothing. I just cleaned the corner near the vending machine. But as I passed by, he looked at me and smirked. "Hey, old man," he said, "you missed a spot." Rosa's eyes flicked toward me, ready to defend me, but I held up a hand. "It's fine," I said softly, and went on mopping. I didn't need to prove anything to him. Not yet. That evening, I found myself standing outside the storage closet longer than usual, the old broom handle pressed against my palm, grounding me. I could hear Briggs's voice in my head, the sound of a man who once believed in me more than I believed in myself. "Pierce," he used to say, "you don't follow orders, you lead them." He'd been wrong, though. I had followed one order too many. The last one. The one that broke me. That night, I went home and opened the trunk I hadn't touched in nearly 20 years. Inside were remnants of a life most people wouldn't believe belonged to the man they saw pushing a mop, old dog tags, photos of my squad, newspaper clippings about a classified mission gone wrong. The top clipping read, "Hero missing after Operation Iron Falcon." Beneath it, a younger version of me stared back, clean-shaven, medals glinting, smile confident. The article said I'd been presumed dead after an explosion wiped out half my unit. They weren't wrong to presume it. The man I was back then did die that day. Only one walked out of that fire, and he wanted nothing more to do with glory, politics, or death dressed up as duty. I left everything behind, the uniform, the name, the expectations, started over, became Daniel, the janitor. For years, I thought I could outrun who I was, but the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it, wearing a familiar face. 2 days later, Colonel Briggs came back to the building. He was there for follow-up meetings with the executive team. As fate would have it, I was assigned to clean the hallway outside the conference room. When I glanced through the glass wall, I saw him sitting across from the CEO, discussing security logistics. Then, halfway through their conversation, he turned his head, just slightly, and his eyes landed on me. For a long, silent moment, our gazes locked. His brows furrowed. Confusion, recognition flickered. Then disbelief. He stood, slowly, as if afraid that if he moved too quickly, I might vanish. He stepped toward the door, pushed it open, and said my name, my real name. "Pierce?" The room fell silent. The CEO looked up, puzzled. The interns nearby froze. I felt every pair of eyes on me. For a second, I thought about denying it, about pretending he was mistaken. But there comes a point in a man's life when running becomes heavier than the truth. I straightened up, met his gaze, and nodded. "Yes, sir," I said quietly. "It's been a long time." He stepped closer, his expression a mix of awe and anger. "My God, we thought you were dead." I gave a faint smile. I was, in a way. The CEO blinked, utterly lost. "Wait," he said. "You two know each other?" Briggs turned toward him. "Know each other? Son, this man saved an entire convoy during Operation Iron Falcon. He's the reason I'm still alive." The room went still. I could feel the air thicken, the weight of their disbelief pressing down. The same intern who mocked me the week before was standing near the doorway, his mouth open. The CEO laughed nervously. "You mean him?" He gestured toward me with a half smirk. "The janitor?" Briggs's tone turned cold. "Watch your mouth. You have no idea who you're talking to." For the first time in years, I didn't feel small, not because of pride or vengeance, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. "I didn't come back to be recognized," I said quietly. "Just needed peace. That's all." Briggs looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "I understand. But men like you, we never really stop serving, do we?" Before I could answer, the CEO interrupted, his tone suddenly polite, almost desperate. "Mr. Pierce, or Sergeant Pierce, maybe we could discuss an opportunity. Security consulting, perhaps? You clearly have valuable experience." I shook my head. "I already have a job," and I walked out, leaving a silence so heavy you could hear the sound of my mop bucket rolling away. The next few days were strange. People who used to look through me now looked at me. The whispers followed me everywhere. War hero. Fake janitor. Why would he work here? But I just kept doing what I always did. Cleaned the floors, emptied the bins, smiled when Rosa asked questions I didn't answer. It wasn't about proving anything. It never had been. But when life gives you the chance to show who you really are, not through anger, but through quiet dignity, that's when the real power shows itself. One morning, a small note appeared in my locker. No name, just 3 words written in careful handwriting. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." I smiled. Maybe the lesson had finally reached the ones who needed it most. But little did I know, that moment of truth would set off a chain of events that would change everything again. Because the past I thought I'd buried wasn't done with me yet. The news spread faster than I ever expected. Within a week, someone in the corporate office must have done a deep search, because suddenly there were reporters outside the building asking if the forgotten hero really worked as a janitor. I avoided them as best I could, taking the back entrance, keeping my head down. But the quiet anonymity I'd built over 2 decades was gone. Rosa was the first to notice the change. She found me one morning wiping down the lobby doors, my reflection fragmented in the glass. "They're talking about you again," she said softly. "Everyone's proud now. Funny how that works." I smiled faintly. People only see what fits their story. Yesterday I was invisible. Today I'm a symbol. Either way, they don't really see me. That night, I walked home through the city streets. Lights reflecting on wet pavement. Voices fading into the hum of passing cars. My apartment felt smaller than ever. I sat by the window, staring at the old photo of my squad. 5 faces, all smiling, all gone. Briggs had called twice since our encounter. I hadn't answered. I didn't owe the world an explanation. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. There was something in his eyes that day, kind of guilt, or maybe desperation. I'd seen that look before, in men who'd come back from places they couldn't talk about. 2 days later, he showed up at the janitor's closet. "Pierce," he said quietly, leaning on the doorframe. "You've been avoiding me." I put down my mop and sighed. "Didn't think there was anything left to say, Colonel." He stepped inside, lowering his voice. "I'm not here for recognition. I'm here because what happened back then, it wasn't as clean as they wrote in those reports. There were people involved who don't want you alive." I froze. The hum of the fluorescent light above us seemed to grow louder. "It's been 20 years, I said. "No one cares about an old mission anymore." He shook his head. "You'd be surprised. There are files resurfacing, people asking questions, the kind of people who erase problems, not solve them." I met his gaze. And I'm the problem. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, as I walked home, I noticed a car parked across the street from my building. Lights off, engine quiet. I felt that old instinct kick in, the one you never lose, no matter how many years pass. I took a detour through the alley, doubled back, watched from a distance. The car didn't move. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew what this meant. The peace I'd built wasn't just cracking, it was over. The next morning, the CEO called me into his office. "Mr. Pierce?" he began, awkwardly adjusting his tie. "We appreciate your service, both past and present, but the media attention is disruptive. Perhaps it would be best if you took some time off." I smiled politely. "You mean you're letting me go?" He sighed, relieved that I said it for him. "Just until things calm down." I nodded. Of course. When I walked out of the building that day, I wasn't angry. I'd lost everything before. Titles, ranks, homes, brothers. But this time, I didn't feel loss. I felt clarity. Because when people strip away the masks they wear around you, that's when you finally see their truth. Still, I wasn't ready for what came next. That evening as I returned home, my door was slightly ajar. The frame was splintered. I stepped inside slowly, heart steady, eyes scanning. The trunk, the one with my past inside, was open. Everything had been moved, searched. On the table lay a single envelope. Inside it, one photo, me, standing beside Briggs back in uniform, and a note scrawled in red ink, "You should have stayed dead." For a long while, I just stood there. The city outside went on as usual. People living their lives without knowing how close darkness sometimes lurks. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Briggs answered on the second ring. "They found me," I said. He cursed quietly. "I was afraid of that. Pierce, listen to me. Don't try to handle this alone. There's still people we can trust. Let me help." I looked around my small, dimly lit apartment. The cracked wallpaper, the worn furniture, the life I'd built out of humility. "You don't get it, Colonel," I said. "I am alone. Always have been. And I'm not dragging anyone else down with me." He tried to protest, but I ended the call. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window again, watching headlights streak by, thinking about the irony of it all. For years, people mocked me for being a janitor, for cleaning up other people's messes. And now, life had handed me the biggest mess yet, one I'd have to clean up myself. The next morning, I made a choice. I took the envelope, the photo, and the note, and went back to the building before dawn. The security guard, a young man named Eli, nodded at me as I walked in. "You're early today," he said. "Old habits," I replied. I headed straight to the basement, to the small room where I kept my supplies. But instead of cleaning, I sat down and started writing. A letter, the kind you leave behind when you don't know what tomorrow holds. I wrote to no one and everyone at once, about mistakes, about second chances, about how we spend half our lives proving ourselves to people who will never understand what we've survived. By the time I finished, the first rays of light crept through the small window. I placed the letter in my locker, locked it, and walked upstairs. At the entrance, Rosa was waiting. "You okay?" she asked, worry in her eyes. I smiled gently. "I will be." But even as I said it, I knew the road ahead wasn't about peace anymore. It was about closure. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't running. I was ready to face whatever or whoever had come looking for me. The next day dawned gray, the kind of morning that felt heavy before it even began. I stood outside the building, the chill in the air, brushing against my face like an old warning. I'd spent all night thinking, and I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Briggs met me at a diner 2 blocks away. The place was half empty, smelling of burnt coffee and old secrets. He looked more tired than I remembered, the kind of tired that comes from guilt that never fades. "You shouldn't have come," I said, sliding into the booth across from him. "I had to," he replied, eyes darting around. "You're being watched. There's a name in that file that never got erased, someone who knows you're still alive. I tried to bury it years ago, but it resurfaced." I waited, silent. He leaned closer. "It's Kroll. You remember him?" The name hit me like a forgotten scar reopening. Kroll, our liaison, the one who sold us out on that mission, the reason my team never made it back. I thought he'd died overseas. I remember, I said quietly. He didn't die, he went private. Security contracts, quiet money, and now he's in the city. If he knows you're still around, I finished the sentence for him. He'll try to finish the job. We sat there for a long while, the silence thick between us. Finally, Briggs said, "Let me handle it. You've done enough. You've given enough." I shook my head. "No, this isn't about revenge. It's about peace. I can't live looking over my shoulder anymore." He nodded slowly, as if he already knew I'd say that. "Then at least don't face him alone." But I did. That night, I found Kroll. Or maybe he found me. I'd gone to the river, the one spot in the city where the noise faded enough to hear yourself think. The fog rolled low, and the water shimmered under the streetlights. He stepped out of the shadows like a ghost, wearing expensive shoes. "Well, well," he said, smirking. "The old soldier's still breathing. I'll admit, I didn't think you had it in you." I didn't move. "You always underestimated the quiet ones," he chuckled. "You could have stayed dead, Daniel. No one cared. You had your peace. You killed good men," I said softly. "Men who trusted you. And for what? Money?" He shrugged. "Everyone sells something. Some of us just sell higher." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The city hummed in the distance. Then he reached inside his coat, slow and deliberate. I didn't flinch. "Instead," I said, "you know what's funny? They all thought I was a janitor. But they were right in a way. I've spent years cleaning up other people's messes. Yours is just the last one." Kroll's hand froze. He hesitated, just long enough. I moved, not out of rage, but out of reflex. Years of discipline took over. The next few seconds were a blur, a storm of sound and motion that ended with him on the ground, gasping for breath, eyes wide with disbelief. When it was over, I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet emptiness. Briggs arrived minutes later, headlights cutting through the fog. He rushed over, checked my arm. Blood, but not bad. "What happened?" I looked out at the river. "It's finished." He followed my gaze, then nodded. "You did what you had to do." "No," I said. "I did what I chose to do. There's a difference." He sighed. "What will you do now?" I smiled faintly. "Live. For the first time, maybe." The days that followed were quiet again, but different this time. The whispers at work faded. The media forgot. People moved on, as they always do. I returned to the building one last time, walked through the halls I'd cleaned for years, and said goodbye to Rosa. "You're leaving?" she asked, tears brimming in her eyes. I nodded. "It's time. There's a whole world out there I haven't seen yet, places that don't care who I used to be." She hugged me tightly. "You're the kindest man I've ever known, Daniel. Don't let anyone make you feel small again." I smiled. "That's the thing about people who think you're small, Rosa. They always look down and they never see you rising." When I stepped outside for the last time, the morning sun was just breaking through the clouds. I walked down the street with nothing but a small bag and the letter from my locker in my coat pocket. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter, because the truth is, life isn't about the titles we lose or the things we own. It's about the moments when we choose to stand tall again, when the world counts us out, and we quietly start over anyway. That night, I found myself on a bus heading toward the coast. A young boy sat beside me, fidgeting with a toy plane. He looked up and asked, "Mister, were you ever in the Army?" I smiled. "A long time ago." He grinned wide. "My grandpa was too. He says soldiers never really stop fighting." I looked out the window, the lights of the city fading behind us. "He's right," I said. "We just learn what's worth fighting for." The boy fell asleep soon after, his head resting against my arm. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum of the road, feeling the kind of peace I hadn't known in decades. Maybe people would still mock me. Maybe some would still whisper. But none of that mattered anymore, because I knew who I was. Not the janitor, not the soldier, but the man who refused to let bitterness define him. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with gold and fire, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in proving them wrong. It's in quietly living well, even after they've forgotten you. For years, they thought I was a weak, helpless old man. But the truth is, strength isn't in how loud you roar. It's in how you rise, how you forgive, and how you keep walking, even when no one's watching. The bus carried me toward the sea, toward whatever came next. And for the first time in a long, long while, I smiled without pain. Because this time, I wasn't running from my past. I was walking toward my future,